Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. I'm genuinely quite excited to speak to you today on this live stream geopolitical update because I haven't really done too much in terms of a wider geopolitical update, although there's a limited amount of this. It's mainly going to be about Ukraine and Russia, but I am going to go to speak about Ceuta. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Iran and the American political situation a tiny bit at the end. And I just love doing live streams and talking to you guys. I am going to settle into some fiery ginger beer just to keep me sustained. So a bit of fiery ginger beer. Oh, I used to be a fiery ginger once. Now I'm just, I don't know, a rotund expresser of too many opinions online. Occasionally fiery though, but not so much ginger. The unfortunately the travails of time and life have got too much for me. I'm now white more than ginger, but hey ho. And I was never ginger. I was beautifully auburn. That was how I translated that hair coloring. Okay. So that's all nonsense. I'm just wittering on until everyone joins in the live stream adequately. And just saying welcome all. Thank you for being here. Hello to all of those in the live chat. And I'm not so much I'm not a flat white. I'm a fat white these days. As be said, not doing nearly enough exercise. Okay. I am going to be talking about all the aforementioned things. I just want to say thank you to all the mods and everyone hanging out here today. Let's get on with this, shall we? As ever, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Keep yourselves in the loop. No, I've just shown you a gingerbread man. Why have I done that? Thank you. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed to the channel. Ginger beer's gone to my head. It's not beer, of course. It's just non-alcoholic fizzy drink beverage. So thank you to those who have subscribed. If you haven't, please do so. It helps out the channel and keeps you in the loop as to what is going on in Ukraine and beyond, as we are going to be discussing today. Okay, we are going to be talking about Ukraine, so let's get to it. And we start with Colombia. Many of you might have seen this story. It was doing rounds, I think yesterday, day before, and it concerns Colombians fighting for the Ukrainians, and we know a lot of them have been doing that and fighting for the Russians as well. But there's been an article in the Financial Times. Here's Christopher Miller from the Financial Times talking about how it could be the case that you have had narco terrorists, if you like, or people involved in cartels from Colombia coming to serve in Ukraine, possibly on both sides, in order to get the expertise in drone warfare in order to take that knowledge back to Colombia and use it in their own conflict in Colombia. So on the front lines in Eastern Europe, a Colombian soldier volunteering for Ukraine's army discovered something disturbing. Some of his other compatriots trying to fight for Ukraine had ties to organized crime back home. The men were weeded out and sent home, but the case was not a one-off. So pretty incredible. Doesn't surprise me. Drones are... I wrote an article for Only Sky sometime back talking about the use of drones outside of the war context in places like Mexico by drug cartels, in Israel actually by criminal gangs to do nefarious things, right? Using drones to murder people. We've seen this in Russia actually, with drones being used to take out gang or cartel, I don't know, nefarious organized crime people. And I'm sure we'll see this in many, many countries going forward. Drones have become an instrument of war, but an instrument of, I guess, murder and crime as well. And what better training for use of these instruments than the war in Ukraine? Okay, the EU has tightened the rules for obtaining temporary protection for Ukrainians liable for military service. From now on, men of military age must confirm the legality of their departure from Ukraine when first applying for temporary protection in the European Union, says Flash News. The relevant decision entered into force on August the 5th and was published in the official journal of the EU. This has been something brewing for some time. The European Union wants to help Ukraine to keep its fighting force at the levels that it needs. The EU and countries within the EU do want to send back working age, fighting age men to Ukraine in the most humane way possible. But of course, you have then this argument over distinctions between refugee status and, I guess, conscientious objectors maybe, but people just escaping from war, really. And on the one hand, the European Union is giving Ukraine an awful lot of money and assistance in fighting the war, and on the other hand, they are welcoming in people escaping from the war and therefore not wanting to fight in the war. And then there's a lot of tension there going on. So the EU is trying to work out ways with Ukraine often, and EU member states with Ukraine, working out ways to best repatriate people or make it more difficult for men, particularly, to find their way into the EU and not have to serve in Ukraine on behalf of their country. So, yeah, all difficult conversations, I'm sure, and discussions to be had concerning that. Um, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned Russia's mass attacks on Ukraine. Good, citing rising civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. He also condemned Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia. Bad. And called attacks on civilian infrastructure violations of international humanitarian law. And I'm sure he'll be thinking about the strike that took place in Gelendzhik recently, where you had but he might be talking about Wildberry's hubs being taken out too. But the beach in Gelendzhik, where 7 people died as a Ukrainian drone was shot down, but that wasn't targeted by the Ukrainians. That was a drone that was shot down by the Russians. I don't know. There's a bit of both sidesism going on here, and it doesn't at all surprise me that that is how he is framing it. Yeah, just there, there needs to be a stronger position from the UN against Russia. Clearly. Die Zeit in Germany is reporting that German authorities, and I've mentioned this. I mentioned this yesterday. You had 3 things going on. What was it? You have the attempted assassination or the planned assassination of a drone company CEO, a guy called Thumann in Germany. You had the drone that was found near the Antonov cargo plane in Leipzig airport that had an explosive and a detonator. I don't think the detonator was working. Something I was reading about how a bus driver there did a heroic thing that maybe ended up with the drone being not working or something. I don't know. I don't quite know the details. But you've got that. And then you've got espionage. German authorities have arrested a 33-year-old Ukrainian man in Thuringia on suspicion of spying for a foreign intelligence service. This is an area of AfD stronghold, by the way, in eastern Germany. I think Thuringia is in eastern Germany. Prosecutors say he photographed a Bavarian defense company's premises in preparation for possible sabotage and sent the images to his handler. This really frustrates me, but there are people working within Europe on the behest of Russian forces there, and that's deeply frustrating. Okay, speaking of, well, it's not quite hybrid warfare, this is actual warfare, but speaking of the pressures on, I think, the European Union, NATO states in terms of prodding and probing and poking them, Russians, this is pushing the envelope, but no one being willing to say, okay, this is war. NATO fighter jets have scrambled at an increased rate of 250% as Russia tests border with military planes, according to NATO. Aircraft scrambles along NATO's eastern border have increased by 250% in July this year compared to July last year due to those Russian military planes skirting alliance airspace without flight plans. So, you have these norms where you provide flight plans and you turn your transponders on or whatever, and it's all official. And you know where the I guess, opposition planes are, because it's in normal peacetime, you'd be at peace, but you're always uneasy, NATO versus the Russians. But now they are doing things improperly and, provoking NATO or pushing that envelope. And we're going to move on to something. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been accused of a few things, and I've done a few videos. Some people say I'm dooming too much, or I'm presenting harmful disinformation, like I'm purposefully lying about things in order to harm Ukraine's chances, or stuff like this blows my mind. And I brought out a video yesterday. In fact, it was really lovely. In fact, I'm gonna show you this actually now. I'll try and find it for you. It's really lovely. I was just looking through. One of my sources is the analyst, and I know I need to be careful sometimes because some sources I rely on also rely on me. And so sometimes I wonder, am I reporting something from the analyst that he's got from me and is reporting himself? And therefore, there's this circle of reportage going on. Anyway, we see things fairly similarly. The analyst and myself, he's a British military analyst on Blue Sky. He just said, in support of a fellow Ukraine ally, ATP Geopolitics on YouTube has been a consistently hardworking and massively productive channel supporting Ukraine but offering a reasonably balanced, warts and all view of Ukrainian prospects. Recently, Jonathan has come under attack for pointing out the changes in the war in the last few months that threaten Ukraine, and I've mentioned them here, especially Russia's increasing ballistic missile campaign that Ukraine has no defense against. I'll detail it again later. Jonathan has been accused of doomsaying, and yet he's doing all he is doing is pointing out that not everything is going Ukraine's way, and tough and intensely brutal times are coming. He's not a propaganda channel, and neither am I. If his viewers don't want to hear the bad news, then they are delusional. I have huge admiration for ATP Geopolitics and everything he has done. Keep it up, Jonathan, which I thought was a really lovely thing to say, and thank you very much, the analyst, for that. I really do appreciate that. But I made some claims recently concerning the shutting down of the Black Sea grain corridor as a response to Ukraine's Operation Molochka that has taken out the Russian ability to export hydrocarbons primarily, but also grain through the Black Sea themselves. Novorossiysk, the Sea of Azov ports, Tuapse, Sochi, all these places down the eastern seaboard of the Black Sea, right? And Ukraine was having great success hitting Wildberries, hitting hydrocarbons facilities, that whole process of hydrocarbon extraction to export. And then the retaliation of Russia. Now, they've always been hurting Odessa, but they've stepped it up with Odessa. And the key thing that they have done is started hitting third-party ships as in nations that they're not Ukrainian ships, but they're using Ukrainian waters to export grain, iron ore, whatever. And I've been quite amazed that Russia has actually been ballsy enough, if you like, to strike at those ships. And then just as amazed that these nations haven't really done anything about it other than to withdraw their ships from the Ukrainian waters in the Black Sea. This has then really, really hurt Ukraine's exports. And I end up doing a whole video on this. Someone said to me, well, don't be ridiculous. They just need to export all this stuff through, railway or through road networks. And if you can get your lorries from the farm to the port, then you can get your lorries from the farm to a port in another country. And I then had to do a whole video saying, actually, this is just not practical. They tried this when the grain corridor was shut last time, and they could only manage something like a quarter of the capacity, and maybe even less than that. And this time round, you've got the railways now being routinely struck, so you're struggling to get stuff out on the railways where they weren't being struck earlier, and roads are being struck as well, and trucking facilities are being struck, which the Ukrainians are doing to the Russians too. But I was pointing out the reality of this situation. We can't just ignore the challenges to Ukraine and just sing about how wonderful the Ukrainians are doing in terms of doing this to Russia. Ukraine is doing it to Russia, but Russia is also doing it back to Ukraine. I reported this morning in my hits and losses that and this is coming from Bloomberg Ukraine, that the Russians have taken out 400,000 square meters of Ukrainian logistics warehouses in July, I think, or recently, which is a phenomenal amount. Now, it's not as much as Ukraine has done to Russia, but Ukraine is a smaller country and doesn't have as much logistic warehouse space as Russia does, right? So this hurts Ukraine. Ukraine is hurting. And the question is, like I keep saying, who is getting closer to the breaking point, Ukraine or Russia? And I don't know the answer to that, and we can just make our speculations. Anyway, that's all preface to backing up what I was saying. So I always when I make my opinions known to you guys, they're not pulled out of my arse in some kind of arbitrary process of just making stuff up, right? I'm basing my opinions on doing 4 years of reporting this every single freaking day. I've got a lot of stuff milling around in my head, and yes, it is a soup of all sorts of information, and I may get things wrong, but I do try and base my opinions on evidence and therefore make them justifiable. So anyway, just to back up what I was saying, nearly 5,000 trucks are currently delayed in the Ukrainian border, or at the Ukrainian border, with the most significant congestion occurring at checkpoints along the Polish border. More than 4,300 vehicles are waiting in Poland, where transit times at some locations have exceeded 6 days. This backlog follows the redirection of cargo from maritime routes to road transport due to the attacks on the ports of Odessa. Right. So exactly what I was saying is that you can't just suddenly rely on the roads and the railway to sort out your problems for the massive amount of cargo that was going through ships down through the Black Sea and out through the Bosphorus Straits. And this then causes an insane amount of backlog, and there just isn't the capacity there. And unfortunately, they are. Yeah, this shows inefficiency and weakness in Ukraine's ability to export what they need to export. And then you're having, and this is happening for Russia as well, by the way, and I'll report on this. I've got a whole section on how Russia is really suffering. So don't worry, I'm not going to be all dooming for Ukraine here, but I'm going to do the negative bit for Ukraine and then the very negative stuff for Russia. But just be aware that Ukrainian farmers are selling below cost at the moment because they're struggling to get the grain out of the Black Sea, and are desperate to, I guess, entice people to take the risk to come to Odessa and Chornomorsk to fill up their ships and then get the grain out of Dodge, knowing that they might well be hit. But if they're getting it at a 15 to 20% discount or whatever, then it might all be worthwhile to take that risk. But the Ukrainian farmers are selling at a loss. Now, Russian farmers are also the same situation exists for the Russians as well. So, it's not just one-way traffic. In fact, you could argue it's worse for the Russians. But I just want to reiterate that it is really challenging for the Ukrainians. And I guess the question was always, did the Ukrainians accurately predict that this would happen? So, because if you had asked me, and bear in mind I'm just a YouTube guy, right? So or take that into account, obviously. But if you'd asked me a couple of months ago, or should Ukraine blow the crap out of Russian ships and ports, I would say, well, as long as those are Russian-owned Shadow Fleet ships, then that seems a good calculation to me, because I don't think Russia would hit international ships in Ukrainian waters. And I think that would be a safe conclusion to come by. And if the Ukrainians came to that same conclusion, then that's a miscalculation, because the Russians have decided to hit international ships, and as a result have effectively stopped the trade of Ukrainian agri-produce and minerals. Now, if that's a miscalculation, then Ukraine have maybe you've just got the wrong sort of calculation going on here, whereby it's worthwhile for them to have followed through with Operation Molochka and all these other ways of harming the Russian export channels themselves. If it's not a miscalculation, then they knew this was coming, and it's still, a net positive, net benefit for Ukraine. I don't know the answer there, but you've got Andrei Sybiha, the foreign minister, saying in 2022, when Russia started its illegal blockade of Ukrainian seaports, the global food price index surged over 25% at times, leading to acute food insecurity for millions of families. Russia is trying to achieve the same result now by attacking civilian vessels in Ukrainian ports and along Ukrainian sea corridor. The consequences for the world could be just as severe as they were in 2022. We urge affected regions and countries to speak out, and the international community to increase pressure on Moscow to demand an end to attacks against freedom of navigation and global food security in the Black Sea. So if you don't believe me, right, when I'm saying this is a problem, I would believe the reality of there being stacks and stacks, 6 days of trucks waiting at the border to try and mitigate against this. And the frickin' foreign minister himself of Ukraine saying, we're in a shit here. We need some help from international players to condemn what's going on with what Russia is doing, because there's going to be a food crisis in the world. So there you go. Like, I'm not making things up. Anyway, that's just me getting on my high horse. I'm now going to go and talk about how Russia is actually struggling a lot because what Ukraine is doing. And there you go. So UK Defence Chief. So before we get there, I just wanted to note that the British Defence Secretary of Defence, Wes Streeting, who is someone that I wouldn't have put in charge of the UK MOD, although he did a really good job with the NHS when he came in. Labour government came in. Wes Streeting became the Health Secretary. Then you started getting this move to get Andy Burnham in as Prime Minister. And Wes Streeting was someone that was wanted to challenge Keir Starmer for the Prime Ministership. So Wes Streeting was the first guy to step down as a Secretary of State and say, I'm going to challenge for leadership. Then Andy Burnham won his by-election so he could challenge for the leadership. And then it was patently obvious that Andy Burnham was far more popular than Wes Streeting, and Wes Streeting wouldn't win a leadership election. So Wes Streeting stepped aside and allowed Andy Burnham effectively to have this coronation because he was opposed, and then Keir Starmer stepped back and resigned himself. So now you've got Andy Burnham in charge, very supportive of Ukraine, all that same continuation. Don't worry about support for Ukraine. But just from a UK political point of view, Wes Streeting to me is quite young, and he's not like a veteran. He's not particularly engaged, as far as I know, in terms of experience with military stuff. And I was just thinking he just didn't look the right part for the MOD. And that still may be the case. I don't know. But you had other people, like now our Chancellor of the Exchequer. I really liked him, John Healey, although I don't think he has got military experience, but he was really good. And then he was replaced by eventually it was Dan Jarvis, who was a veteran himself, and you got a couple of other veterans. And I would have kept Dan Jarvis on, but I think Dan Jarvis was quite supportive of Keir Starmer. Anyway, Wes Streeting is now the Secretary of Defence for the UK government, and he's gone over to Ukraine, to Kiev, to meet with Zelensky, and that's really good. Like, as long as we just keep going with our big support for Ukraine, like, I'm happy with our government by and large. And there are lots of things going on in the background with the UK. And one thing that we have done just recently, this is Ed Miliband, who was once the leader of the Labour Party. He ran against Boris Johnson for prime ministership. He lost that election. He then became the net zero secretary just recently, and environment secretary. He's now been moved under Burnham because he was in Keir Starmer's cabinet, but was warning Keir Starmer. He was kind of like pro Burnham, but remained in the cabinet, but was kind of whispering against Keir Starmer. But he's been an effective net zero. So whether you like net zero or not, just forget the reality of net zero. He was really strongly fighting for his department, and he was actually a very effective leader of said department. He's now been made the foreign secretary, and he carries a bit of weight because actually he's done a lot of foreign diplomacy, the COP26 and going abroad, and etc. etc. He is now the foreign secretary and seems to be supportive of Ukraine. The UK has now slapped fresh sanctions on the Russian shadow fleet. So a couple of days ago, the UK announced they would continue to step up action against Russia and its shadow fleet activity to protect our national security, our economy, and global stability. And that actually came from John Healey, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, was the former Secretary for Defence. So he knows how much we need to support Ukraine. He's now pulling the purse string, in charge of the purse strings. So it's quite good to have had some movement where you get the guy that used to be massively supportive of Ukraine in the MOD going to now being the Chancellor of the Exchequer in charge of the money. So he knows how much help Ukraine needs, and now he's in charge of where the money goes in the treasury. So that's quite a savvy move certainly for Ukraine. So when you got John Healey coming out and saying, so we need to up our sanctions, I think it's coming from a good place here. The UK has imposed sanctions on 12 more companies, 1 individual, 6 vessels linked to Russia. UK Foreign Office, that's under Ed Miliband, said the new measures target Russia's financial, energy and industrial sectors, as well as its oil and liquefied natural gas exports. Sanctions cover Ozon Bank, Rosexim Bank, Center Invest, Realist Bank, Stavro and Teleport Bank. Alexander Zhdanov, the owner of a chemical company, Siltron, was also added to the list of companies, and then it lists a whole load of more companies here were sanctioned. In addition, the restrictions apply to 6 vessels, including LNG carrier Arctic Express and tankers Perseus, Torvian, blah, 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 blah. Lots more ships. Okay, so that's really good. And the EU has now come along thereafter and said Europe has unveiled another round of sanctions in response to Russia's latest strikes on Ukraine. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said 5 individuals linked to Russia's military-industrial complex have been added to the sanctions list, calling every new attack another reason to increase pressure. So that's good news that all of Europe seems to be coming together to squeeze as much pressure onto Russia as at all economically possible, or at least it is increasing. Let's then talk about the effect of these not the effect of these sanctions per se, but the effect of kinetic sanctions imposed by Ukraine on Russia. And we have Euromaidan Press reporting, and so this is our big section on the economic travails for Russia. Russia runs the world's third largest refining industry, yet after Ukraine struck 24 of its 34 biggest refineries, July processing hit its lowest since 2002, so a 24-year low, and gasoline sailed from Tangier to Murmansk. In other words, they're getting petrol from Morocco to Russia. Rather than exporting it, they're importing it. The Arctic oil exporter is now an Arctic fuel importer. And Morocco paid back by creating an immigrant crisis in Ceuta in Spain, or Ceuta as part of Spain. Now, I am going to have a whole section on Ceuta later because there is a big connection between Russia, Morocco, the United States, and Spain, and it is fairly concerning. Now, Yevgeny Istrobin has said, look, the key results of the Unmanned Systems Forces Operation Molochka in figures. So this is the project to destroy or not destroy, actually, damage the ships to make them inoperable, but not sink them. These ships in the Sea of Azov and Black Sea, now 200 of, have been hit. How many have been taken out of operation, I don't know. Russian grain exports have plummeted by 61.3% in the third 10-day period of July. Overall, grain exports from Russia fell by 37.6% year on year. So July is obviously going to be much worse. The rest of the year, it's not been as bad. But although for the whole year to have gone down 37.6%, based primarily on what's happened in July, that's really significant. So really, I think the one you want to look at is actually the July number, 61.3%. So going forward, if the grain export numbers are down 60% plus, that is going to hurt Russia an insane amount. And if that then goes up, that's a real problem. But of course, what happens to Russia is happening to Ukraine as well. So total grain exports in July amounted to 2.026 million tons, down 37.6% year on year. A coal export decline as well in July. Rates of the port of Kavkaz. So Kavkaz is just opposite the Kerch Strait. It's that kind of spit that comes out, and that is a major port that evidently offloads a load of coal. Exports a load of coal from there. That's fallen 11 to 14% compared to July to April. So that it is serious. In Azov and Taganrog, rates fell by 19%. And then, so you got the rates per ton as well. Rostov-on-Don fell by 12%. And then in January to June, coal transshipment through these 4 ports fell 50%. So you've got some serious impacts on the Russian economy as a result of the strikes on both port infrastructure and the ships themselves. So Kiev shows a graph here that indicates Russia is progressively losing the ability to export fuel of any kind, now down 59% since 2029. So this is July 26. You've got the green here is diesel fuel. That has absolutely plummeted. Remember, they put diesel actually wasn't one they initially put bans on exporting. It was gasoline, but diesel I think has been added now. It's been added to the export ban, or at least it's been heavily constricted. And you've got all these different fuels here. They are being affected by all of the above, like strikes on hydrocarbon extraction, processing, transshipment, pumping, storage, export, etc., and then of course all the ships being hit in the export. So This affects grain as well. So Jay and Kiev adds that Russia's grain industry continues to implode, with the fuel crisis bringing prices for most grains to below production cost. Unable to export from the Sea of Azov and most Black Sea ports due to Ukraine's blockade, the fuel prices making transport too expensive for potential buyers. Farmers are facing what they describe as catastrophe. A quote from a grain operator, quote, "Today we are being offered 8 rubles for barley. It's practically nothing. We shouldn't even be growing it. Its production cost is 9 rubles. We were selling during the harvest, but even before the mass sales began, because as soon as mass sales started, the prices, of course, dropped significantly. Why did they drop? There are no reception points in Rostov, no reception points in the Sea of Azov. Logistics in Novorossiysk are very expensive. Truck drivers are taking advantage of the rising fuel costs. We are practically selling at cost. Prices are the same as they were 10 years ago. The situation is catastrophic. There are practically no grain reception points anywhere, and where they do exist, at the elevators, the queues can reach up to 300 Kamaz trucks per day. I think that's 30 to 40% of the land will not be sown. There are no financial resources, and there's nowhere to sell the wheat. Those who don't have a side business, livestock farming, pig farming, or poultry farming, are in a terrible situation." So it's not just like your money that you're taking now for selling your harvested crops, but actually, and that's going to be hit by things like drought and climate crisis, etc., etc. So everyone's already struggling anyway. You can't sell this stuff apart from selling it under cost. So you're making a loss. So people are saying, well, I might as well just cut I might just leave these crops to go, leave these fields to go fallow or whatever, not even harvest them because it's not worth us doing because we're making a loss on it. So just don't do anything. But then, of course, that affects global food supply, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also the fact that then it's not even worth sowing. There's no point spending money sowing these seeds on all of these fields if next year you're going to be in the same situation. So you're spending all the money sowing to then be below cost in terms of harvesting it and selling it next year. So you might as well save all that money and not sow crops. And if you're not going to sow crops next year, you've freaking screwed. And the world, the global food supply and food security is massively shafted. And this war is throwing global food security into a state of crisis, I would say. And of course, that's Russia's fault. Jane Kiv then reports that profit for Russia's agricultural industry is down on average from 40 to 60% over the past 2 years. And here's a graph that shows agricultural organizations for January to May, corresponding year, billions of rubles of profit. And it's not looking very good. So you've got 2024, 2025, 2026. I mean, you're absolutely down. The red is below everywhere but poultry meat. And maybe it's because you're just killing all your chickens because you can't feed them now. So I don't know. Maybe you're making a profit there. But essentially everywhere else, eggs as well, a little bit up there. But otherwise, everyone's in trouble. Or maybe, you can get enough grain because you're not exporting it because you're buying it internally. I don't just kind of spitballing here, but I would assume that if you can't export the grain, then you can at least get the grain to other farms. And so therefore it might be cheap to be a poultry farmer now because you can get really cheap grain from domestic harvests. And that's probably why you've got profits in poultry, but everywhere else you're in trouble. Anyway, that's just me trying to add 2 and 2 up to get 4. Right, yeah, and if as Who's Poppin says, without cereals, your livestock will starve. Knock-on effects. Yeah, absolutely. Unless you can feed those, as I've just mentioned, those crops domestically to livestock farms. Russia's largest banks are suffering from the attacks on Wildberries. We already know this, but a bit more detail. According to SVR, Sberbank and VTP have recorded a deterioration in the quality of their loan portfolios due to the growth of overdue debts and an increase in reserves. We know that VTB is very much in cahoots with Wildberries, and as Wildberries gets hammered, VTB as a bank takes a hit. There's a lot of debt that Wildberries has with VTB. In Sberbank, the share of problem loans increased to 5.5%. In VTB, profit for the first half of the year fell by 20%. The bank is cutting staff and increasing reserves. You've got a crisis looming surely here. The withdrawal of cash has continued. I've reported on this before, but you're getting a run on banks. This is a pretty good indication that you've got a financial crisis brewing. On August the 5th, since the beginning of the year, 2.158 trillion rubles have been withdrawn from banks. The liquidity deficit of the banking sector has increased to 2.5 trillion rubles, according to Yevgeny Istrobin. And this is the 2026 numbers in red compared to 2025, 24. 2023. So 23 was looking bad for a run on cash, but it's looking particularly bad for 2026 right now. And then Russia's, I don't know if that's, there's another one that shows something. I don't know what that says. But anyway, you get the point. Russia's banking sector, says Strapcon Center, continues to spiral, now entering a dangerous new phase. Problems at Wildberries have become another catalyst, exposing deep structural weaknesses at Russia's largest state-owned banks. Things are not looking good. Mounting loan restructuring, rising defaults, and weakening capital are clear signs that years of war financing and state-directed lending are taking their toll. As Russia's largest banks report second quarter earnings, it's clear that even before Ukraine's campaign to destroy heavily indebted logistics companies, the country's banking sector was on the edge. Mortgage arrears surged nearly 50%. Corporate defaults increased 22.6%. Project finance defaults jumped 27.9%. VTB's, we've already mentioned, quarter two profit collapsed 34%, while H1 profit fell 20%. VTB is cutting 10% of its head office workforce as profitability and capital inadequacy continue to deteriorate. Sberbank's stage 3 problem loans have risen to $36.3 billion of for impaired loans. Wildberries borrowers are increasingly requesting debt restructurings, adding fresh pressure to banks already struggling with deteriorating asset quality. And Russia's largest banks are no longer insulated from the consequences of a slowing economy. Credit quality is worsening, reserves are rising, and confidence is weakening. Financial costs of the Kremlin policies are becoming increasingly visible across the banking system. So it's all looking rather challenging. Now, I have a very long thread here by Anton Gerashenko, which I'm going to attempt with you. So he said, we would very much like to see the Russian economy enter a phase of rapid decline right now. That would force the Russian authorities to end the war. However, we will probably have to wait until 2027 to 2028. A rapid decline occurs when 2 or 3 shocks coincide at the same time. Add to this the problems in the labor market. That is when controlled deterioration can turn into uncontrolled deterioration within a matter of months. Let's take a look at where the Russian economy stands right now. It's already clear that the problems are becoming systemic. Military spending no longer ensures the necessary growth. Civilian production is shrinking, investment is falling, businesses are accumulating debt, and the labor shortage is compounded by hidden unemployment. The government is containing the crisis, but it's shifting the burden onto businesses, the public, the regions, and the banks. The war-driven stimulus is almost gone. After growing by more than 4% in 2023 to 2024, Russia's GDP increased by approximately only 1% in 2025. For 26, the Bank of Russia forecasts growth in the range of 0 to 1%, with inflation at 6 to 7%. Gross investment may decline by 1.5 to 3.5%. This signals a transition from military overheating to stagnation accompanied by high inflation. So what that really means is they were artificially inflating the GDP in the economy, as far as I would understand this, by making a load of military equipment. And if you look at your GDP, your gross domestic products, how much economic activity, how much stuff you're making, that's all wonderful, you're making loads of stuff. But for Russia, it's kind of one-tracked economy where you're making stuff and then that doesn't really make too much money elsewhere. So you're not making something to then sell on. Like this tank then goes to the front line and gets blown up, right? And then you're like, we need to make another tank. And he just goes to the front line and gets blown up. And it's like, this is great. Our GDP is growing. Look at all the stuff we're making. Absolutely awesome. But actually, it's not really generating as much heat in the economy as making other things. So if you made a computer, right, that computer goes to a company and it helps a company to develop it, to increase its own business efficiency and productivity, right? And so, you're making things to help other people, or it's a component that goes into this that makes that, and that goes into that, and I think with with a lot of the military equipment, it ends up just getting blown up, and it doesn't really help the economy so much outside of the manufacturing process itself. And that is, I think, a bit of a challenge. So there's kind of like, yeah, okay, your GDP was doing quite well, but that's largely due to massive government investment in the military-industrial complex. The Russian economy has split into defense, he continues, and civilian sectors. According to Russian economist and demographer Natalia Zubarevich, growth is continuing primarily in sectors that receive government defense orders, kind of what I was saying: civilian engineering, metallurgy, woodworking, production, building materials, transport. They're all contracting. In early 2026, the construction sector fell by about 10% and housing commissioning by 28%. No one's buying houses. No one's got the money really to do big well, you're not going to invest. Basically, investment at this time in Russia is incredibly risky, and no one's going to be flush with cash in this economic climate. So no one's going to be like going out and buying bigger houses and upscaling and doing all this. So no one's going to be building new premises, new warehouses. Especially right now, you're thinking, God, now's the wrong time to be looking at building massive warehouses. Although maybe it's the right time to be building small warehouses. I don't know. Uh, but anyway, construction is a really good indicator of the health of an economy, and that's been absolutely hammered. So he said more than half the regions are experiencing an industrial decline. The regions with the best performance were predominantly those with large defence enterprises. The defence sector no longer supports the entire economy, though. It diverts resources away from the civilian sector. Civilian enterprises cannot compete with it in terms of wages and government guarantees. Sectors providing housing, transportation, healthcare, agriculture, and public infrastructure are weakening. Today, the labour market is facing an increasing number of crisis-related issues. Unemployment in Russia stands at just over 2%, which is a record low. But this figure is not only an indicator of high employment, but also a sign that the labour pool has been almost completely exhausted. According to experts' estimates, the current labour shortage amounts to approximately 1.5 to 2.5 million workers, which is why they are supposedly importing a lot of workers from North Korea, India, these kind of places. War simultaneously increases the demand for people and reduces their numbers. The army is constantly recruiting contract soldiers, and defence enterprises are expanding production. So basically, you're taking people out the private sector, putting them in the public sector, which then makes a labour shortage even more acute, which makes unemployment really low, which is great. It makes it look like everyone's in work. That's fantastic. Actually, you've got a shortage because you're killing all your people. At the same time, mobilisation, military casualties and disablement, emigration and low birth rates are reducing the labour pool. A small generation born in the 1990s is entering the labour market, while the larger, older generations are leaving it. So you've got your demographic shift from going from that small number of old people at the top and a lot of young people at the bottom to replace all the old people you lose. Now societies are looking like that, which means you have more people at the top of the demographic pyramid. It's now no longer a pyramid. It's like a big fat wedge at the top. And that means you got lots more people out of work because they're too old. And then all the fewer people down here having to support the people up there with taxes to pay for their welfare. But there's not enough people down here because your birth rates have dropped. So it means that the welfare system, and this is not just for Russia, this is all countries of the world are going through this. I've talked about this plenty of times. And unfortunately, there's really only two solutions. One, have more babies. Two, have lots more immigration. People don't generally like more immigration, and they're not having enough babies, and you've got a problem, right? So if you're dead against immigration, then how are you going to solve this? I saw a thread this morning actually about a Ionia Scola thread where he was talking about how. In fact, I'm going to bloody find that for you because let's have a bit of a sidebar because that's quite a long one. This is a really interesting, I think, thread that talks to what I was just saying. Like, if you like, and this isn't like I'm neither pro nor anti-immigration, by the way. I'm just like, you've got to understand economics. That immigration plays a really important economic role, and if you're going to say no to immigration, then you just need more babies because no, you're not. I'm being oversimplistic here, but essentially, you're not going to be demanding more stuff for the perpetual economic growth you need for capitalism just by having the same amount of people just demanding more. So you can have AI playing a role, you can have, mechanization, but then actually, does that lower productivity and like people being out of work? Then you've got welfare issues and so on and so forth. Anyway, Yoni says pro-natalists, in other words, people that are supportive of having more babies, pro-natalist schemes are not a serious solution to demographic collapse and have failed everywhere they have been tested. Relying on state incentives as a primary strategy to fix demographics is economic suicide, and politicians pushing it are completely out of touch. He says, look at the countries that are trying out pro-natalist approaches to try and solve their economic problems. He says, look closely at the countries that have made these programs a top priority. Hungary dedicated an unprecedented 5% of its GDP to marriage loans, tax breaks for mothers, and yet its total births recently hit another record low. So they've utterly failed to get people to have more babies. Government checks cannot compete with 21st century realities. At absolute best, these expensive state programs yield a minor slowing of population decline. They cannot reverse the trend or return a nation to a sustainable replacement rate. This is something that Elon Musk is obsessed with. I mean, he's got a point. Like, I just think it's the wrong options. It's trying to make people have as many babies as possible. Like, people don't want that. You don't want 10 kids. I don't want, geez, I struggle with twins, right? Like, properly struggle with them. Like, I can't even imagine having like 4 kids or 6 kids. But anyway, as not to have a go at people who do have that. People are choosing smaller families, and financial bribes do not change their minds. Modern market economics require an immediate influx of productive adults to maintain supply chains, healthcare systems, pensions, and tax revenues. So remember, you've got to support these old people at the top. So not only do they need welfare in terms of like pensions and payments and subsidies from the state, but then they need carers, because then they go into care, then they're in nursing homes, and respite homes, or like dementia care homes and whatnot. And then you need the carers to support that industry. But you've got fewer and fewer people coming up into employment because you're having fewer children. Fewer children, more old people, people live longer. That's your problem. You can't solve it by making people have more children, because that's not happening. Those policies don't work. It might make it a bit more wide at the bottom, but it's not enough to sustain the growing echelons at the top. So modern market economics require an immediate influx of productive adults to maintain supply chains, healthcare systems, pensions, and tax revenues. Immigration is far from flawless, but it remains the only functional bridge available to keep our systems afloat right now. So put aside your conclusions, your intuitive beliefs about immigration. This isn't about, like, I don't care what your position on immigration is. Let's just think in terms of, what do we do about this problem? Now, it's really interesting that the right-wing Takaichi government, so the new prime minister in Japan, came in on a massive anti-immigration platform, right? She came in and then has had to completely do a 180, because she's recognized, the government, as far as I understand it, has recognized that economically they're absolutely screwed without immigration, because they don't have the birth rates to support their economy at the moment. And so they have had to kind of, it's where the rubber hits the road, right? You can be a populist government that comes in and said, we're going to solve immigration, we're going to, yeah. And I wonder what happened. I mean, Trump would be long dead by when the impact of all the kind of, if they actually got rid of 15 million people from the US, what that would do to the economy in the short to medium term, in terms of labor shortages, inflationary pressures. Then, because as soon as you've got labor shortage, you then have inflation, because everyone's fighting to get fewer people in the job market. You need to attract them to work for you and not for them, because you're all fighting over the same small pool of people. So the wages go up necessarily, and so that you get a wage inflation spiral. As wages go up, people can afford more, so the prices go up, and then you get wage inflation spiral. So, like, it sounds great to not have many people in it, to have really low unemployment, because it means everyone's in work, but it means you have that pressure on wages. So he said we should absolutely work on making society more accommodating for parents to slow the drop. However, relying on that as a primary strategy without outside labor is a recipe for collapse. Immigration is the only serious tool left on the table for the immediate future. Now, you may disagree, I may disagree with that, but if you want considerable economic growth, he is saying that immigration is the only way, only serious tool. And that's what Pedro Sanchez of Spain said. And that's why they naturalized 500,000 people recently. I argue that it's what Angela Merkel was really thinking when she got 800,000 immigrants, that whole post Syria thing. And she got into a lot of hot water for accepting a load of immigrants. But I think there's a strong, I think there are economic pressures that lead people to do that. Now, the question is, for Pedro Sanchez, he's actually talked about that very openly. If you're going to do that, you need to explain to your population why you're doing that, because otherwise they're like, what are you doing letting in all these immigrants? And it becomes a social cohesion problem. But you also need to treat it very carefully, because a massive influx of people from a different culture from you is going to have a really deleterious effect on social cohesion, and there'll be ghettoization and all sorts of things. So, there's no right answer here. Like, these are the problems with, you know, countries that are getting higher and higher populations, but no more space. You don't grow physically, and you're not reclaiming all this land. You've got the same amount of land, more people in there. You're fighting over resources. Do you have the infrastructure in place for an influx of immigrants? Do you want an influx of immigrants? Well, if you don't want it, how are you going to deal with your demographic catastrophe and needing to grow capitalistically, right? So this is, I don't know there's a particular answer to this, because not that many people are up for loads of immigrants coming into their country. And that's, I've forgotten where I was really. So what Anton Gerashchenko was saying is, they point out that at the end of 2025, 4.6 million of the 33 million workers at large and medium-sized enterprises were working part-time. In civilian industrial regions, shutdowns and reduced work weeks are becoming widespread. According to various estimates, capacity utilization has fallen to 77% overall and to 69% in the manufacturing sector. It's because the problem lies not only in the number of people, but also their qualifications and where they're located. There are workers in sectors and regions where demand is declining, and there is a shortage of them where engineers, technologists, mechanics, drivers, and operators of complex equipment are needed. Okay. Where did I get to? So just one more from here. Migration remains, okay, so then we get onto the point I was just making. Migration remains a major external source of labor for Russia, but Russia itself is reducing this supply through anti-migration policies. So here's your problem, where you've got a population that, you know, like the Russian, the Slav ultra-nationalists are not going to be big fans of having huge amount of North Koreans and Indians coming in and stealing their jobs, as they would see it. So you're going to have a social kickback to this, but they also need to do that in order to get people working, right? Because you've got to migrate, you've got a labor shortage. So yeah, Russia is reducing its supply, even though this is a major source of labor. The number of regions restricting migrant employment has risen from 15 in 2023 to 51 by the end of last year. St. Petersburg has banned migrants from working as couriers, even though the sector is facing a labor shortage. Deportations and restrictions on family visits and children's children's education are being tightened. So then you get this problem of like, right, we resent all these immigrants coming in, so we're going to stop them coming in, and then we're screwed. And then you've just got another economic pressure on Russia, and like there's a tension going on here, and they're not going to solve it by restricting immigration, but actually what Ukraine would want them to do is to restrict immigration. It's kind of a two-horn dilemma. Like for Russia, if you accept loads of immigrants in, then you get social cohesion problems. Ukraine would love that. Loads of people arguing, people fighting with immigrants, and then, you know, you get discontent in Russia, like brought on by the war and labor shortages, exacerbated by the war, not completely caused by, but exacerbated by the war. So you either have social cohesion problems, or you don't have social cohesion problems and you have economic problems. And either way, Ukraine is, I guess, pretty happy with that. By the way, Ukraine is going to be suffering from this as well. So Ukraine will need a massive influx of people. Well, they need it now, but the post-war. At the moment, they're being propped up by the EU and other allied nations. But after that, after the war comes to a close, they are going to have to contend with this issue as well. So between January 2025 and January 2026, the number of foreigners in Russia fell by about 10%, while the number of migrants in the construction industry dropped by 15 to 20%. Of course, construction industry is also contracting, so that could be an explanation. Once again, we see a paradox. By imposing restrictions on Central Asia, Moscow is attracting people from India, Africa, North Korea, and other parts of the global south. This is likely because these people are easier to deceive and persuade to sign a contract with the Russian army. So there's another element there where it could be getting these people in to just fight in the army. Labor shortages fueling inflation. I've already talked about that. The military and defense enterprises are raising pay faster than productivity is growing. Civilian employers are forced to raise wages or lose staff. Business costs are rising and translating into prices. High interest rates curb inflation, but simultaneously weaken domestic production. Expensive loans reduce investment and increase spending on debt, rent, and leasing. And of course, they are inflationary. At the same time, interest rates cannot directly halt rising prices for gasoline, transportation, utilities, and tariffs on natural monopolies. Corporate debt problems are becoming systemic. According to calculations by the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting, the share of companies in the financial vulnerability zone may rise from 23.7% of revenue in 2025 to 32.5% in 26. Companies spent 36 to 38% of their profits on debt service. So the really expensive loans that you have to get out because of the financial situation, macro financial situation the country is in, mean that companies are now spending more and more money on servicing their debt. And that is also the case, and I showed you this the other day, for the country itself. So Russia's debt servicing costs have gone up to, was it something like, is it 9% or was it 7% of their expenditure? which is an absolutely phenomenal amount of money to be spending on nothing, on just servicing debt, right? You're not spending it on, we're going to build roads or build schools. You're spending on debt interest payments, which is there's no GDP in that really. So this is a problem for both companies and the state. The situation is worse in the automotive, machinery, aviation, coal, textile, and furniture industries. And as we come to the end, he said a banking crisis is possible, but the government is postponing it through control and debt restructuring. Moscow controls the largest banks and can restructure debt, support large enterprises, and conceal some of the losses. This allows the crisis to be postponed, but shifts corporate problems onto the banks and the budget. Ukrainian strikes are creating direct production constraints on Russia. Damage to oil refineries, ports, terminals, and transport infrastructure is reducing Russia's capacity to refine and export oil. In May, the CMASF lowered its GDP growth forecast for this year from 0.9 to 1.3% to 0.5 to 0.7%, directly attributing this to the strikes on oil infrastructure. High oil prices offer no relief for Russia as it cannot refine and export the necessary volumes. And finally, therefore, we can say that the most likely near-term scenario for Russia is Russia's war-dependent economy is not a rapid collapse, but stagnation. Russia is still capable of preventing the system from collapsing, but it is becoming increasingly unable to ensure its development. Each successive year of the war narrows the Kremlin's ability to simultaneously finance a war, support the civilian economy, and maintain social stability. The cost of a future transition away from the war model is also rising. Situation for the Russian economy could become critical as early as next year. Between January 25 and January 26, the number of foreigners in Russia decreased by approximately 10%. That's I've already done that bit, so he's got that, but he's accidentally copied part of it. So there we go. So oh my goodness, he's got more. No, he's just recopied much of what he said before. Yeah, so early as next year. So he says it's going to be a critical issue early next year. Here, Jenkins said, bad news for the Kremlin just before Putin's fake elections. The first 40 days of Ukraine's blistering drone campaign has dropped Russian support for the war from 69% a month ago to 50% today, a new low. So the new Levada poll gives a 19% precipitous drop in support for the war. This is crucial, right? And that's a massive, massive decrease there. For the first time since the war began, half of Russians no longer consider the invasion of Ukraine successful. Only 8% of respondents called Putin's SVO very successful, the lowest number in over 4 years of research. The same percentage, 8%, called it extremely unsuccessful, 20% rather unsuccessful, 22% didn't know. The share of those definitely supporting the war dropped to 34% compared to over half during the first month of the invasion. So Putin will be looking at this. He knows that the economy sucks, and these people know the economy sucks, and that's why they think the war sucks, because the war is affecting the economy. So it's not just about trying to predict the economic collapse of Russia, but also the popular collapse of support for the war. And that will affect Putin's decision-making. Now, then the question is, and I always have this conversation with you. I was talking with my mate about this last night. My mate was around here till 1:30. We were talking about all sorts of things, politics. Hadn't seen him for ages. It's great to have him around here. He dropped me off after we went to the pub in Pompey last night and had a good few ales with another mate. But we're talking about this. I often talk about who is controlling the Kremlin. Is it Putin? Does he control the FSB? Does the FSB control him? Siloviki, elites, oligarchs, military? Who is pulling the levers? Because Putin doesn't read the internet, doesn't have a smartphone, so he can't verify all the data that he's receiving from people. So in order to fact check that, he has to go to other people to bring in data. But he's still victim to the data that's being curated to him by others. So he is arguably something of a pawn. I don't know whether he ultimately is more powerful than the FSB or whether the FSB is actually pulling his strings. So Vision says Putin is reportedly relying more than ever on Russia's security apparatus to stay in power. Growing influence within the FSB is said to be fueling unease among members of Russia's political and economic elite. According to Bloomberg, Putin is increasingly depending on the FSB, while a growing number of senior Russian officials fear the agency's influence is becoming difficult to control. The report states that officials such as Sergei Kiriyenko, who oversees Russia's domestic political affairs, are gradually losing influence as Putin gives greater weight to hardline figures from the security establishment rather than more moderate advisors focused on economic policy. Bloomberg also reports that the Kremlin's campaign of repression is expanding beyond politics, increasingly targeting business leaders, scientists, and figures from the cultural sector. Among those affected are physicists, actors, and prominent businessmen. At the same time, the report says public support for the war has fallen, as we just seen, to its lowest recorded level, while Russia's political and economic elite are becoming increasingly concerned that the current system is struggling to cope with mounting internal and external challenges. The assessment points to a Kremlin that is relying ever more heavily on its security services as pressure mounts both within Russia's ruling establishment and across society. So I guess this report still sees Putin as in charge, as him getting hardliners in positions of power and influence and using the FSB to maintain his power, rather than, I sometimes wonder, whether the FSB could, if they wanted, get rid of Putin um, and change things up. Right. Sorry, I have been banging on a long time, haven't I? So Laura Loomer, I've talked a lot about her, like white supremacist, MAGA, America First person who's had a change of heart with regard to Ukraine. I thought this was interesting in her attack on Fox News. She said, when I was in Ukraine, I drove to Kharkiv, 30 kilometers from the Russian border, interviewed the founder of the Azov battalion in a bomb shelter. Then I dispelled lie after lie spread by the woke Reich and Russian propagandists. My reporting sent Russian state media into a frenzy and panic, and now they're calling for my assassination on their state TV. Then I handed an exclusive interview with President Zelensky ahead of the entire mainstream media. President Trump reposted my interview on Truth Social and was even asked about it in the Oval Office. So explain to me, please, how Fox News host Howard Kurtz booked me on his podcast to discuss my Ukraine reporting, and then Fox News management killed the spot off 20 minutes before the interview was supposed to take place. They had no time for the biggest interview of the week, but they did have time for a segment 2 days later on whether AI can fix your boyfriend. Fox News is truly TV for stupid people. They don't talk about things that actually matter, but they always have time for bimbo guests and bimbo news stories that have no actual news value. Wow, I agree with her here. But isn't it interesting? Like, Fox News isn't always anti-Ukraine. Sometimes you get, certain generals coming on and being supportive. I forget the name of that general. What's the guy they have on often? It's kind of quite hawkish, former NATO. Anyway, they often are supportive of Ukraine, but clearly not nearly enough. And here she's saying she was cancelled, giving a very pro-Ukraine interview to a Fox News host, and that was cancelled 20 minutes before it's due to go on air, and then they showed some absolute dross. She's like, what is Fox News doing? This is a channel for idiots. And this realization, she said the other day, she's come to a realization that I did have this. Have I got this? Oh, have I got this? I did have this. Oh, it's a really... Oh, no, I haven't. She came out the other day and said, I've come to a realization that Republicans are idiots, and it turns out almost all the Republicans I know are idiots or whatever. She's like really pushing back against republicanism here, against Fox TV, and it seems to be around the whole kind of Ukraine war thing. So some fascinating stuff going on here. No, it's not Ben Hodges on Fox. It's Jack Keane. Jack Keane, thank you. It's Jack Keane is one of them. He was the one I was thinking of. So yeah, thank you. He's a guy that's often on Fox News doing stuff. Yes, that's right. Anyway, I think that's really interesting. I need to dig out the comment she had on Republicans. It was absolutely fascinating. I wonder if I can find that quickly. I don't really want to be searching Loomer's stuff because I don't like her one bit. Republican. That's going to be coming up with too much stuff. Yeah, if anyone can find that, the one where she goes to town on just republicanism in general, it is absolutely fascinating. But I can't find it here. Not this quickly. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, if anyone can find that for me, because it is really, really interesting. Anyway, that's enough of Laura Loomer. Let's move on to talk about the US with regard to Ukraine. So This is exactly what we want to be hearing. A new US intelligence assessment warns that Putin could test NATO's resolve with limited action even while the Ukraine war continues. This reverses an earlier US view that Russia would avoid provoking NATO while tied down in Ukraine. What you want is the US intelligence services and military services and intelligence to be very upfront about the threat that Russia provides, that the threat that Russia is. And that needs to be very clearly communicated to Trump. So this is good news. I'm not trying to be hawkish and say, isn't it great that Russia is a threat? I'm trying to say, isn't it great that intelligence services in the United States are recognizing that publicly? Officials now assess Putin could attempt a limited assault on a NATO member state in the coming years, and the scenarios range from major cyber attacks and hybrid operations to small-scale ground incursion on the alliance's eastern flank, not a full-scale invasion. The time window runs from this autumn through to 2029. The assessed goal is to fracture the alliance and challenge Article 5's credibility, with Putin viewed as potentially more dangerous when backed into a corner by slow battlefield gains and Ukrainian deep strikes. So the American intelligence service now reversing their views, and hopefully that will filter to Trump, but it won't, let's face it, because he doesn't read anything like that. Lithuanian military intelligence has stated that Russians may use captured Ukrainian drones for provocative attacks on NATO countries. Last month, the Polish Minister of Defense raised this possibility as well. Furthermore, there are 2 cases in which Russians have allegedly already attempted to use captured or copied Ukrainian drones for attacks. One such case was reported in Moldova. In the second case, drones similar to the FP1 or FP2 was spotted by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft drone operator. So there you go. Now, the Washington Post has revealed that the US has also used. So let's go back to the first claim. Okay, back to the beginning. The US has used virtually all of its long-range missiles in Iran, depleted ATACMS, Patriots, but offensive weapons like ATACMS and prisms. Prisms are the replacement to the ATACMS. You would hope that the US might have got ATACMS to the Ukrainians as they're kind of obsolete, but they've ended up using the whole stockpiles of ATACMS in Iran, just firing them endlessly at the Iranians. And then Trump was saying, no, we don't have a problem with this. And then Pete Hegseth, it got leaked out that basically they have run out of missiles. And then that's made Trump look like an idiot. So Trump's had this massive argument at Camp David with Hegseth. So Trump and Hegseth clashed at Camp David over the Iran missile depletion concerns. And this last weekend, President Trump demanded answers from Hegseth over extreme munitions shortages. The Washington Post reports that the US also has used more than 1,300 ATACMS in the initial weeks of fighting. One US official told the Post the ATACMS stockpile is drained to the extent that there's basically none left. And that has also been said about these other missiles where they say they've virtually run out. So that is just incredible. Now, why this is important, and I've got this later. So we're going to return to this in the geopolitics section because this is a bit of a crisis. But this is causing people to react and say, well, okay, well, how about, what does that mean in terms of the Pearl Initiative to get weapons to Ukraine? Can NATO nations buy Patriot interceptors off the US to get to Ukraine? And when asked that question effectively in a press gaggle the other day, yesterday, Trump said, well, we need these Patriots. So he's now admitting that they need Patriots, which means that they're not going to sell them to Ukraine. So Ukraine can't even buy them, or NATO countries can't even buy Patriot interceptors. So the Wall Street Journal has written, albeit an opinion piece, saying, will Putin leave Ukraine without Patriots? Putin's barrage killed 17 since Kiev wasn't able to intercept the missiles. And this is all a kind of like a criticism of the US, essentially, of Trump's decision-making. Roman Sheremetyev says, well, this is a pleasant surprise. The Wall Street Journal editorial board published a major piece criticizing the US failure to provide Ukraine with missiles it desperately needs to defend its cities from Russian ballistic missile attacks. Someone shared my recent post, I am utterly ashamed, in the comments under the article. It became the most liked and most shared comments under the piece. Thank you to everyone, blah, 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 blah. I meant every word I wrote. I am utterly ashamed, he said. I am utterly ashamed that the US has stopped any help to Ukraine. We promise Ukrainians that if they give up their nuclear weapons, we will guarantee their sovereignty. We made it official and called it the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. But when Ukrainian sovereignty came under attack in 2014, we did nothing, just as we are doing nothing today to stop the Russian aggression. I'm utterly ashamed of the US president, a man who not only refused to help Ukraine survive, but openly sided with the criminal Putin. Since Trump took office, Russia has exponentially increased its missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities and civilians. Trump gave them silent permission. I am utterly ashamed of those who voted for Trump, and especially those who still, after all the lies and betrayals, continue to cheer him on. I find such behavior despicable and morally bankrupt. Finally, I'm ashamed, utterly ashamed of everyone who remains silently complicit in this genocide. People who claim that they are neutral. The time of judgment will come, whether in this life or eternity. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, quote, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless, and not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. Really interesting, although I disagree with all the God talk. Like, this is called kind of omissive will. Like, we're talking about theology, actually. So we want to do a bit of sidebar onto discussions of the existence of God. There's this idea that if you talk about natural evil, so say a tsunami that kills 240,000 people because of plate tectonics, right? And if you're talking about whether God is morally culpable for that, you can say, well, God didn't cause that to happen, other than he created it all to happen and knew it happened in the first place. But you have omissive will, which is, well, if he doesn't step in to stop that happening, then that is the same as making it happen. Right. So this is a theological move or an atheological move where you're saying, well, it's not good enough to say that he didn't make that happen when he could have stopped it happening. So that's what I call omissive will. So you will to omit doing something. And it's exactly what's happened. Sorry to talk about like religion and theology here, but here, like, so I would argue that is an example of how God looks evil by not stopping 240,000 people dying in a tsunami. It's like, why would you want that? So that has to serve a greater good. Why would 240,000 people, animals, kids, unborn fetuses, why are you allowing those people to die? How is that necessarily instrumental to bring about a greater good? Because that's the only thing that you can argue as to why you should allow that to happen. Because it's nothing to do with free will. It's nothing to do with any of this. Anyway, I don't want to get into theology here, but I have done. Maybe I do. So in this case with Trump, he's acting like the god here. Like, if he could provide stuff but chooses not to provide stuff, then it's a bit like walking past someone drowning in a pond, right, in a lake, and you're next to you is a ring that you could throw to them, and you decide to not throw them the ring. Right, that is an act not to help them, and that therefore leads to their ultimate death. So you are therefore, and in fact, this is in law, you can be held culpable for their death, legally and morally, right? Because you decided not to save them when you could have saved them. So the question here, I mean, this is, I guess, what the Wall Street Journal is saying, is that if Trump had the ability to help Ukraine and has decided not to, then he is complicit. And those people not holding Trump to account for not helping Ukraine, they are being complicit in their silence. So by not criticizing Trump, if you are a supporter of Trump and a supporter of Ukraine or just general humanity, there are problems there. So anyway, a little bit of philosophy. Hey, is what I do. Right. Okay. The Ukrainian court has now set a $130,000 bail for the just now former ambassador to the United States. She is being investigated for illicit enrichment and false asset declarations, so corruption. So that is a high level, controversial corruption scandal now going on in Ukraine at the moment. Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan is ready to supply gas to Ukraine and expand energy cooperation, according to Ukraine's foreign ministry. The foreign ministry So, as soon as I criticize God's existence, like she turns off my internet. I mean, what's going on there? I, oh dear. Anyway, hello, I'm back. Please, I hope you didn't all run away. Uh, I'm still here. I was talking about Azerbaijan providing gas for Ukraine. So let's get straight back into it. I've wasted minutes, valuable minutes. Um, Anyway, yeah, so Azerbaijan has offered to give gas to Ukraine, which is fantastic because obviously they've got the winter to contend with. But at the same time, even though Ukraine's energy landscape is in a real state at the moment, they are now providing energy for Hungary because of the climate crisis and the droughts going across Europe. Rivers are running dry, like the Danube is at historical lows, and the Danube then feeds a couple of cooler cooler pools for the reactors for a couple of nuclear power plants, certainly in Hungary and indeed Romania. And Hungary can't get its nuclear energy because of the Danube River, and so they are now getting, it appears, energy from imported from Ukraine. Wow, incredible. So Hungary's closed its Pax nuclear power plant for the first time ever and is taking energy from Ukraine. And just saying on the energy thing here, Serhi bought six Dutch turbines in southern Ukraine. I talked about this previously, how Ukraine was buying some old wind turbines that still have 15 to 20 years left because certain companies, I was doing some research into this some weeks back when I was having a big debate online on Twitter about this, but basically, as a company, if you're running a field and you're thinking, okay, well, you've still got 15 to 20 years left, but actually new turbines are that much more efficient that even if we replace these now, even with 15 to 20 years left, we're going to make more money off generating electricity. It's worth our while getting rid of turbines at 15 to 20 years remaining on their life cycle because of the inefficiencies compared to the brand new turbines and stuff like that. But these are still really useful if you can pick them up. So Ukraine has picked up um, uh, six turbines from the Dutch. A Russian drone has damaged one, but they've repaired it. Refurbished turbines can have 15 to 20 years left. Factories are buying before the Dutch program gets moving. Net zero. Cannot count how many now work in Ukraine. I don't know what that means. I guess that's to say, who knows how many wind turbines are working in Ukraine. But that is a really cool way of being able to continue to generate electricity. I would keep them as far away from Russian drones as possible. And you want to decentralize your electricity provision. I just want to go to the United States very quickly on this topic because at the same time, the Trump administration, remember, they've already done this with several wind farms. They've paid Total Energies, I think it is, of France, something like $1 billion not to build a contracted wind farm. Absolutely. It's incredible that at a time when there's an energy deficit in the United States because they want to build all these data centers, he's saying that I'm so lobbied by the fossil fuel industry that even though one wind farm he shut down after it was 80% built, right? And then you get all these court cases. Like Denmark, I think, have taken them to court, or the Danish company has taken the Trump administration to court. But he's carrying on doing that. So check this out. The Trump administration will pay German energy company RWE $1.2 billion to cancel its offshore wind projects. In return, RWE will shift much of its investment towards US natural gas and LNG projects, reflecting the administration's broader push away from offshore wind and toward fossil fuels. At the same time, the world is burning, right? Well done, Trump. You are such a dingbat. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. To you. Right, we're going to talk about Ceuta, and we're going to start with Russians' connection to Ceuta, or Ceuta, or Ceuta. I got it. I just want to correct a mistake I made the other. I can't even blame it on the kids, really. One of them's not here, and the other one's upstairs having a bath. So anyway, I really do apologise. There's something weird going on with the internet provided to the house at the moment. If it happens again, I'll probably knock it on the head or something. So there could be some just recurring issues. But I was apologising for getting a claim wrong about Ceuta the other day. So I'm British English. When we lived in Gibraltar, the British would call it Ceuta. Spanish call it Ceuta if they are from sort of most of Spain. But then Andalusia, I said pronounces a th, but they don't. It's the other way around, and they would pronounce it Ceuta. So I just got the th part wrong with the Spanish when I was talking about it before. Anyway, I just want to say thank you very much to you legends, Richard Bennett. For gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you very much. Michael Vuchar as well. I was wearing one of your caps for the Hits and Losses video for my Hits and Losses video this morning, Michael. So thank you for your support. Thank you, Zeb Carter. Legends one and all. The Pirate back in the zone. Haven't seen you around for ages, the Pirate. So enjoy your weekend, he said, peeps. And famine in Russia next year, he suggests could be the reality. Thank you very much, the Pirate, for your support. We've got Stephen Bendal. I'm optimistic for Ukraine in the long term. Anyway, now it's Friday, and I'm ready for a fabulous Ukrainian beer from Noviska. Cheers, Jonathan and all. You legend. I'm sticking to my ginger beer. Cheers, buddy. Let's have a drink together. Here's to Stephen and all my Norwegian friends. And speaking of some European support here, thank you, Mechtild Ottawa, Mechtild W Ottawa, Mechtild Ottawa. I don't know. Hello and hello to you. A few more. Oink. Today is International Beer Day. Have one on me. Damn straight. I've got some IPAs in the fridge. Do I have any international ones? Or are they British ones? I've got a Sol, but it's brewed by Heineken. It's not imported. So I'm gonna have to work on that one, Oink. Thank you for the heads up there. Demographics is not the issue. Our economy needing continuous growth is. Yeah, to go back to that whole capitalism immigration thing, like we need a system that doesn't perpetually need growth, right? And so there needs to be an alternative to capitalism that can deal with stagnation in terms of economic growth and people generally. Like we don't have the capacity to grow our populations infinitely, right? And so we need to develop a way to be able to deal with that economically. And at the moment, I don't think it's forthcoming. So there is a real economic theoretical problem to be solved there. Malrate says, on oft-pieced comment, JP, would be great if you could get Kalen Robertson back on the channel. He's busy, I know, but done great stuff this year. Interviews with Zelensky and Brovdi and called out Biennial and Organish. Yes, I should do, really. That is true. He does contact me occasionally. We do have the odd chat. So I probably should have a chat to Kalen. That is, yeah. Thank you for the push there, Mal. I do appreciate that, and thanks for your support. Really, really is great. Oink. God is like an American corporation. No guarantee and no after sales service. We shouldn't be getting into these discussions because I will alienate people in my listenership. But if you want those discussions, I've got another channel that gathers cobwebs mainly, but it's called Atypical Philosopher. That's where ATP comes from. I'm Atypical Philosopher. I've also written a dozen books on the topic. So if you want a good old discussion of all matters philosophical and discussion about whether or not God exists, you can go and check out my other channel, and we can be free to discuss those things there. But I don't want to upset some people here. Right? Okay. Let's get to. Yeah, so this is interesting. This doesn't surprise me. Japan wants to increase birth rates. Exactly what I'm saying. Like, you've really only got two options: immigration or increase birth rates. And increasing birth rates is very labor intensive, quite literally. But yeah, I'm such a child. It's a lot of hard work, let me tell you. So yeah, increasing birth rates or immigration, and not everyone wants to do either of those things. And okay, well then, how do you get economic growth? Right. So Philip Obaji Jr., I want to speak to him again as well. The EU is investigating Russia's involvement in the information campaign regarding the events in Ceuta. Right, so let's just revisit Ceuta rather briefly. And I've talked to you about all the ins and outs. I think the connection between the United States and Israel is definitely there, even if it wasn't overtly making it happen, facilitating it happening and spreading that kind of disinformation and ideology. I think the United States is at least championing what happened in Ceuta. And when I say the US, I mean the Trump administration, and actually the disinformation perpetrators that exist in these spaces. So here's one from Morocco. So when you talk about 60,000 people from Morocco charging across the border there, and you're thinking, who are these people? Are they immigrants? Here's a poor and hungry boy fleeing from Morocco to Spain in search of a better life. Turned out to be a very well-known Moroccan internet influencer, and there's his car. And there's no way he was staying over there and getting and going all the way back to or going trying to in whatever manner possible, get to mainland Europe and start a new life in Europe. He's a rich influencer in Morocco, and the same with a bunch of these kids that you're seeing getting into Ceuta. Now, that's not the same for everyone, because although most of the people were returned to or did return to Morocco, some of them did stay, and there are still issues of thousands of people remaining in Ceuta and trying to escape, getting round up, put on trucks, then jumping off trucks as they're going back to the border, and then causing issues. And what you had, so first of all, you had the Moroccan. I think the Moroccan government supporting this. I think you had the border guards, as you can see here, like literally in the water, directing people to go to Ceuta. So it's very clear that Morocco was behind this at the very least. Moroccan police forced them to get into the water and to cross into Ceuta is the claim here. And then you had people like here, Nick Shirley. He's the absolute dingbat that went to, was it Wisconsin with all the Michigan, Wisconsin. Yeah, it's Wisconsin. Isn't that Tim Waltz? I always get them mixed up. But anyway, complaining about the corruption going on in Wisconsin with these family centers, the Somali family centers or whatever, taking money and blah, 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 blah. He went and did videos there, and he's this right wing, almost conspiracy theorist guy that goes around, or he's just an agent provocateur, basically going around, and he's now going as if he's some kind of roaming CNN reporter or whatever, going to Ceuta to report on it. And here he is talking with all of his greatest disinformation spreading props. Here saying, here's a truth from Ceuta, Spain. 60,000 migrants from Morocco's border stormed the small town and are now hiding in the mountains of the city to reach mainland Europe. No, they're not. Most of them were returned. And Moroccan migrants said Moroccan authorities let them through their border, and Spain literally opened their gates upon arrival. Many migrants thank Pedro Sanchez for opening the border. Ceuta is now effectively shut down to looting concerns, and the military is losing power as migrants outnumber them and continue to escape into the mountains. Now, thousands of military-aged men are set to spread throughout Europe due to one country's failure. They're not set to spread throughout Europe because they can't get to Europe because Ceuta's on the northern African coastline. And they've got as much chance of getting to Europe from Ceuta as from 1 mile up the road from the coast of Morocco. This is just such disinformation. It blows my mind, and it just really, really annoys me. So Nick Shirley spreading disinformation again. These kind of right wing influencers getting involved. Here's one I think from the Netherlands. This is what's actually going on now in Ceuta. So speaking to some locals there, but then also spreading a whole bunch of sort of disinformation. Now, it's not to say all of the people did go back, and there were some claims. Spanish government said, look, it's not a problem anymore. They've all gone back. Actually, a bunch of them did stay. And there are issues with getting rid of the rest of them. I don't know what the situation is now. This is a few days back. But look at this, right? So I'm going to show you some articles in a second. Just very briefly, the Guardian view on the events in Ceuta. Chaos and tragedy are weaponized by the far right. Another one. Ceuta was a carnival of anti-migrant content for hateful opportunists on the right and a lesson for the left. And this is perfectly encapsulated in what you're going to see. This is a neo-Nazi activist called Isabel Peralta in Spain performing a Nazi salute in front of the Moroccan embassy. How are we here? How have we got to this point where you've got a person happily able to do a Nazi salute, and that is, I don't know, in this way? I just We just forgotten the Second World War. Like, yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm well up for 6 million people getting exterminated. Yeah, brilliant. Well done. What is going on? So Vacnit Soup, Pekka Kaliuniemi has it right. On Twitter, the Ceuta narrative has already been completely taken over by MAGA independent journalists. With a new account, your timeline will be filled mostly with the people like Benny Johnson and Nick Shirley demonizing Spain and its Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Hardly surprising considering Elon Musk has tweaked the algorithm to fit his political agenda. Nick Shirley is best known for his propaganda trip to Ukraine. So remember, he went to Ukraine and was showing pictures of expensive cars in Ukraine and saying, look, this is all corruption and blah, blah, blah. And apparently behind the scenes, he was like quite normal. And then when he went on camera, he was like horrific. Where he thought Butcher was on the front line. Benny is best known for taking Kremlin money to produce anti-Ukraine propaganda. And these are the people spreading shite like this. And so that leads the Guardian to say, look, this is just absolute ammunition for the far right. Instead of finger pointing at Spain, mainstream EU leaders should be showing solidarity with the Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. So what happened initially is that loads of European leaders, because they believed that this was an actual migrant crisis, they went hard on Pedro Sanchez and against Spain. And then it was only a few days later, everyone was like, oh, actually, it looks like, yeah, it was promoted by Morocco, possibly by the United States and Israel. And it looks like it's way more complicated than we thought. And it wasn't, you don't have 60,000 migrants in flip-flops and board shorts ready to spend an entire life in another country just standing in their flip-flops and board shorts the other side of a border. You don't suddenly have 60,000 people there unless you're trucking them there on the back of trucks. Oh, that's exactly what you had. Even Nick Shirley said that. And Nick Shirley had to actually admit that they were the Moroccan government were like opening the door for them. So at least he had partially some kind of understanding there that the Moroccan government was at least somewhat supportive of that. He's got that little clip where you've got them coming off the back of the trucks. Anyway, you saw that when I showed it to you the other day. I don't know if it's here. Here it is. So 60,000 migrants. Here they were climbing over all the walls and whatnot. And then they were, shipped in trucks, and the Moroccan gendarmerie were directing them off the trucks, and then the Moroccan border guards were opening the gates. I mean, he's claimed that the Spanish were opening the gates. Maybe it's like you don't open the gates, they get crushed. I don't know. But certainly the Moroccans opened the gates, and it's all highly, highly controversial. Anyway, I thought he showed it there, but there it goes. So there's that truck. The gendarmerie standing in front of them, and these are all organized. Like you don't have those kind of scenes without some kind of organization. You don't have 60,000 people suddenly arriving at a border without some kind of organization the other side of the border, right? So this was definitely something to do with Morocco, and it should be a lesson for people who. It should be a lesson for all sorts of people. But for people on the left or centre or even centre-right, we need to be learning that these will be weaponized incidents by the people who have nefarious agendas to perpetuate. Now, the Moroccans seemingly have come out and admitted that there were some issues going on here. Like Morocco's Interior Ministry has given its official version of the mass migration crossings into Ceuta and Melilla. Heavy misinformation on social media. So they admit the social media misinformation. Work of popular human smugglers. Are they admitting that this was staged then? Not quite, but there is a little bit of an admission going on there. Vacnit Soup says the Moroccan government is now saying that the Ceuta migration wave was organized and amplified through social media. A similar campaign is currently being run on TikTok, where people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq are being encouraged to migrate through Russia and Belarus and enter Europe via the Baltic states. This is what Philip Obaji Jr. is saying is happening in Africa, where the Russians are getting people to go up from sort of Central Africa through this one particular pathway up to Libya and other places and out and into Europe from there to give further migration issues to Europe and lead to the rise of the populist right in Europe, which is to the benefit of Russia. So Russia's heavily involved in this. These migration campaigns have been coordinated using phone numbers registered in Russia and Ukraine. That will be occupied Ukraine, I would have thought. It appears that alongside Belarus, similar operations are now being organized through Morocco and other African countries. Hostile actors are exploiting migration to destabilize European states while simultaneously boosting pro-Kremlin far-right parties that campaign heavily on anti-immigration policy and platforms. And then, just as if that wasn't enough, and I said, look, so Morocco voted for the Abraham Accord. This was a normalization policy for Trump in Trump 1.0 to get Israel's relationship with the Middle East normalized. And Morocco were one of the few people that actually signed up to that. So Morocco are in the Trump sphere of influence. They're also in the Israel sphere of influence. Israel wanted people to help with the war against Gaza and a war against Iran. The United States wanted help with war against Iran. Spain said, no, you can't use our air bases. That really pissed off Trump. It pissed off Israel. Israel said, we're going to get our revenge. And then, like back in April, you had a Moroccan journalist writing an article saying, here's something that the US and Israel could do. They could organize some kind of crisis in Ceuta, and then lo and behold, like 3 months later, 4 months later, you've got a crisis in Ceuta, exactly as was written in the article by a Moroccan journalist on an Israeli news site, right? So you're like, okay, what's going on here? Morocco, Trump administration, and the Israeli government are doing something in cahoots here. And then you think, was that a bit conspiracy sounding? But then it turns out that Morocco's just said that they've named a highway after Donald Trump. So Morocco names an entire highway after Donald Trump within a week of the Ceuta happening. Pretty remarkable stuff here. So it all seems to be very, very much connected and part of an agenda. Right. Okay. Because of my delays and having a problem with my technicals here, I probably should bring this to an end. Let's just do the Iran stuff. I'll do the Iran stuff and leave everything else to another video. Right. So we're going to start, though, with a bit of European economics and monetary policy. So the analysts here talking about this. But by the way, if you want to see a really good update on this, go to the House of L. House of L has got an excellent video on USA panics as the ECB, European Central Bank, launches a 50 billion euro reserve system. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary's euro raid collapses. Okay, in case you don't know what that means, let's give a little bit of a synopsis here from the analyst. In a key move, Europe establishes a euro as a reserve currency. In the past few weeks, the United States, without consulting the European Central Bank, used 25 billion euros to buy Japanese yen and prop up the Japanese currency. It was almost half of the US currency reserves. The US wasn't in the least bit bothered by the complaints issued by the European Central Bank. In a matter of days, though, Spain, France, Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands created with the ECB officials a collateral-based facility to loan as much as 50 billion euros, that should be, not pounds, to any central bank that needs it. It's a titanium armored facility that makes a euro a reserve currency, a status that only the dollar has held for decades. The international finance sector is delighted as it places a euro in a position of huge strength. It's a genuine reserve currency offering opportunities to other national bank facilities previously only available with the Federal Reserve. Indeed, it's already a preferred choice. What you have had with Donald Trump trying to maintain the United States at the top of the hegemonic ladder, top of the supreme power ladder in the world, having the extraordinary privilege of having the dollar as the international currency of trade, he's acted against that in trying to have America remain powerful, but he's done counterproductive things. So he's pissed off all of his allies. So they then move closer to China. They start doing more and more trade in yen, euros, pounds, and other currencies, which then means that the dollar is not being used as the international currency so much. We then start buying our own stuff rather than buying American kit, and everyone's just really pissed off with Trump and the American system and the American government, right? So what that does is essentially provoke a move towards a multipolar situation. So this is what BRICS has wanted for since its inception, which is to move to multipolarity. So you have, instead of one nation at the top of the ladder, you have multiple areas of power around the world. China with yuan and Russia, and in this case the EU. So he's moved the world closer. He's expedited that end result, right? Which is exactly what the US shouldn't want to happen if the US wants to remain the most powerful in the world. The other thing he's embraced is cryptocurrency. And he's done that not really understanding cryptocurrency, but he recognizes a political opportunism of doing so. And he did that ahead of the 2024 campaign, got all the crypto bros and everything around him, gives them a load of power, gives them a load of money. He's then involved in crypto. But the thing is, moving towards crypto to try and get involved with crypto, I don't really understand crypto, but in terms of international currency, you're moving away from reliance on trade in the dollar, which is what is propping up the United States and its power base, and it allows you to borrow loads more. The reason why they're able to have such insane amounts of debt in the United States is because of the dollar. It also allows them to sanction other countries. You can sanction countries by relying on them using a dollar to trade and saying they can't do that. You can do no dollar trade. Our banks won't allow you to trade dollars there. And then that punishes countries that want to do trade. If you move away from the dollar, it's very hard to sanction those countries, right? And or sanction those entities because they can use other trade means. And if you're going to embrace cryptocurrency, even more so. So what the way I understand what Trump is doing at the moment is just moving the United States just more and more quickly away from its base of power, the fundaments of power that it has. And everything he does is actually strategically stupid. Like Donald Trump is just an idiot. But as long as he grifts on the back of it, I mean, he's going to be rich. So that's what he thinks about. Now, foreign correspondents at the Wall Street Journal have argued that the imbalance between Russia and China is actually widening and Putin is on the losing end. Xi Jinping's latest move, openly asserting his own agenda without even pretending to coordinate with Moscow, shows how the power dynamic has shifted. This isn't a partnership, it's hierarchy, and Putin isn't at the top. This is something I've long said, that Russia is a vassal state of China. Wall Street Journal's take is blunt. China leads, Russia follows, and every new gesture from Xi makes Putin's weakened position impossible to hide. Okay, just a general statement there from Wall Street Journal, someone looking at that. Bit on Canada here, in the same kind of domain. Donald Trump spent the week deriding Canada, so he keeps attacking Carney in Canada and Canada's leadership while threatening 50% tariffs from the 19th of August. Mark Carney has answered with arithmetic instead of insults, saying that the transformation of the Canadian economy was just beginning to show up in the numbers. Canada is creating, he claims, jobs at twice the rate of the US. And I probably will talk about lots more stuff in this closing section, because just to give you a bit of understanding on this, jobs numbers today have shown a complete crisis. So the US economy was expecting to add 83,000 jobs, but it actually lost 23,000 jobs, which is a net loss of 106,000, which is an absolute catastrophe. So skyrocketing deficits, heavy borrowing, and somehow still no real job growth. Trump is fumbling on every single front, destroying everything he touches, says Yoni Escola. So the jobs are not looking good, which is not cool for the US. But Canada, on the other hand, is doing quite well with jobs. So Canada is creating jobs at twice the rate of the US, he said, and pulling in foreign direct investment at twice the rate of the nearest G7 competitor, which happens to be the US. Growth is picking up for this quarter and business investment is finally moving too. The markets have been saying something similar for a while. Toronto closed 2025 almost 29 points higher, its best year since 2009, and is 30% over the past 12 months against 20% for the S&P 500. So on a bunch of metrics, Canada is doing better than the US, and yet the US is threatening Canada. So Canada is pushing. The point is, what I just made, the same point, is that he's pushing these countries away from the United States. So rather than as a positive sum game where the United States and Canada can work well together to give a gain to both of them, Trump is pushing Canada away. So Canada then goes closer to Europe and arguably to China, and then the US loses out, and not just kind of economically, but also political. The political capital that Trump is burning at the moment is nuts. Now, at the same time as this climate crisis we've got and a war in Iran, oil giants are making insane profits. And actually Trump has railed against this recently, and rightly so. He's like, how come we're at war in Iran and you guys are making record profits and then gas prices are going up in the US? And he's right to make that criticism, but will he do anything about it? Because he's being lobbied massively by these very same people. So oil giants are making $90 billion of profit from the price surge as the climate crisis engulfs Europe and the war in Iran takes place. The reason why most media focuses on celebrity gossip and whether it's bad, Andy Burnham is having a holiday, etc., is so the public never talks about things like this. You get distracted by these other things, but the reality is these big companies are making huge amounts of money. So Trump, okay, the Iran war. I wanted to get to this topic to finish. Trump told reporters on Air Force One that he called off some massive attacks he was going to put on, give the green light to on Iran. It's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. He's won the war in Iran. He's solved more wars than any other president, and they all happen to be the same war. So he solved the Iran war like 58 times. The latest was, he's called off this massive attack because of a deal on the Strait of Hormuz is imminent or eminent, as he says, and ultimately the denuclearization. Minutes later, Iran's IRGC launched an anti-ship cruise missile at the US-backed oil tanker. You can't true social your way out of a hostile missile fire. Trump's endless bluffing is making America look weaker and more humiliated by the hour, says this source. Now, Trump also said that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar and Iran convinced him to call off the planned attack, saying, I think there's a deal. A reminder, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar have all got business ties to the Trump family. Nothing about this is normal, says Republicans against Trump. Now, on that subject, I would be very dubious about this source. So this is Patricia Marin's, which is a pro-Russian source. But actually, there was a lot of talk about how he may have called that off because of pressure from Saudi Arabia. But then there's also claims that he called off the attack because they've run out of missiles, right? And all of these seem like eminently plausible. Washington Post, Trump is about to escalate the Iran war, but dwindling stockpiles of air defense and battle damage are limiting his options. The last sentence below is shocking, saying the military can't do this safely, but Trump isn't aware of that. So, quote from the Washington Post, the US is planning for a wider war, said one US official familiar with the internal administration discussions, adding that the Pentagon was increasing the number of military aircraft in the region. But the official, speaking on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to talk to the media, cautioned that the expansion of US operations will be limited by dwindling stockpiles of air defense and long-range munitions and constraints on the ability to surge more troops and aircraft into the area because of battle damage. Quote, we do not have enough to safely sustain operations, and I don't think the White House is aware of that, the official said. And clearly the White House wasn't, because we now understand that he has had an argument with Pete Hegseth because he didn't realize this. So that's the truth. Anyway, NBC News report, a US official said Trump's frustration about the war in Iran stems from disagreements among his top advisors, adding, quote, after all this time, there is no unity. The official also said, quote, there was no real strategy for reaching an end to the war, warning that, quote, we have had a series of tactical victories, but are facing a strategic defeat without clear policy guidance or a decision about where this is going. The official added, he did not intend this to be a long drawn out war. Trump has admitted that Straits of Hormuz is not safe. Vessels remain vulnerable to Iranian foreign mines, and shipping companies are unwilling to risk billions of dollars in assets and then be struck by Iran. He acknowledges Iran retains the ability to strike at will, saying, quote, it's easy for them to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile anywhere, somewhere along or in this waterway, no matter how badly defeated they are. Trump also concedes people don't want to risk ships worth billions of dollars and expose them to the possibility of accidentally hitting a mine in the Strait of Hormuz, adding they don't want it. In other words, he's admitting that Iran hold the cards and he has no idea of how to end this. All of which, you've got this spat between Pete Hegseth at Camp David with Trump, which is being reported widely. The encounter took place on the sidelines of the cabinet meeting at Camp David on Friday, where Trump vented at Hegseth that he thought the munitions issue had been fixed, according to both people familiar with the conversation, who, like others, spoke on condition and anonymity, blah, 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 due to fear of retaliation. The shortages, particularly in long-range guided missiles and air defense interceptors, have been part of the reason Trump has pulled back from launching additional missile strikes against Iran in recent days, one of the officials said. So apparently he lost his temper, clashed with Pete Hegseth, and had a shouting match about running out of ammunition. Now, if you want a good synopsis about what is going on in Iran, or indeed what isn't happening, or like the repetition, I'm just the Pod Save America guys give a good, like, really quick, pithy synopsis here.
Let's take these two things separately for a second. So let's start with gas prices. Now, most of the time when gas prices go up, presidents go out of their way to make it clear that gas price, it's a global oil market. There are lots of things. The president's not personally responsible. Not Trump. He swings in the other direction and leans in directly to say, look, I am the guy, me. I decide whether they go up or down. And I may decide to make them go up again. Just FYI, that's me, Donald J. Trump, the gas price raising guy. That's me.
And
Truly
like
nuts.
what is he even? I guess he's referencing that he may attack Iran again.
He's threatening to bomb Iran again.
Right, but also he was in the Oval right before he recorded. Someone asked him about this potential deal between Iran and Oman about the Strait of Hormuz, and he's like, "Well, we kind of control it already."
Kinda.
No, I'm sorry. He said it's kind of open already. We control it. So, which is also interesting because it's like if we control it, why is it only kind of open? The truth is, if they make a deal, Iran and Oman, about the Strait of Hormuz, notice we're not involved. Iran still controls the strait, and they will be charging they want to charge a 5 to 7% fee for all the tankers that go through the Strait of Hormuz. And Gregory Brew, who's an Iran expert on Twitter, was just crunching the numbers, and he said a 5% fee assessed on outbound tankers would translate into $52 million per day for the Iranian regime. So we are currently spending $1 billion a day, taxpayer dollars. All of us, we're spending this on a war that has left 18 Americans dead, hundreds wounded, and is going to result in status quo from before the war, with the addition of now Iran controls the strait and is making $52 million a day. And I guess the regime is slightly different in that they are younger and more radical than the old regime.
Yes. So things are going great. There's also a Washington.
Honestly, I just thought that's a really good synopsis of where it's at. Utterly insane. Trump is an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing. He's honestly like I keep saying, if you still support this guy and think he's really good on international policy, then you need your head checked. Trump is a douche, and the war in Iran is an absolutely stupid decision, and it's ruining Ukraine in many ways as well, exhausting the US's stockpiles of everything that should act as deterrents for China to do anything, and so on and so forth. And all the while, Iran gets $52 million worth of taxes on us. Like, we all are buying stuff that is resultant on that oil being consumed somewhere in the production of things around the world, right? So if Iran is exacting that toll, that's a toll on us that is being forced upon us by Trump's war, which is costing the American taxpayer $1 billion a day. So Americans should be incandescent with rage about what Trump is doing in Iran. You should have protests on the street. You should have Congress going nuts. But the Republican lawmakers are fucking spineless, and it is an absolute disgrace. At the same time, like, the US has no imports are coming from Saudi Arabia, zero in July, which is the first time in 40 years, according to Bloomberg, that's happened. US refiners were buying more than 800,000 barrels a day from Saudi Arabia earlier this year, and now it's nothing. This huge decline is a result of Iran's Strait of Hormuz closure, combined with Yemen's Houthis' Saudi marine blockade, which have cut off Saudi crude oil exports to the region. What this does is it means the US has to, I presume, produce even more of its own stuff and probably release more of its strategic reserves in order to battle price rises in oil because of supply cuts. But they've kind of tanked all their, well, not tanked is probably the wrong word. They've used up all the strategic reserves already, and this will surely lead to large inflation for Americans. I can't see it going any other way. At the same time, you've got job market contractions leading to really poor economic indicators. It's like he's doing everything he can to ruin his chances in the midterms, and he will try and cheat his way to the midterms and get who knows how he's. Well, we've all got a pretty good idea all the different mechanisms he can use, from the media to redistricting, etc., etc. Now there is just the last thing I'm going to say. Attorney General Todd Blanche is acting at the moment. The guy that interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, that is Trump's former lawyer, former attorney, and he's a highly controversial guy because he's basically, there's some really good analysis on this that you can go and look at, but he's essentially, Trump really needs him to be the attorney general because it's he that will do the bidding of Trump more than, there's no other person that he can get to do that kind of role that will do for Trump what Todd Blanche will do. So it seems like there's a real desperation for him to have Todd Blanche. We hear that Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Republican from Alaska. We hear that Susan Collins from Maine. And all it would take is one other to vote against Todd Blanche. The two of them, if there's one other, and I think Cassidy is Bill Cassidy. I think he's the last undecided. If he votes no, then this nomination will fail. So much relying on Bill Cassidy. And you can imagine the amount of pressure that Trump's going to be putting on him. That is huge. If he doesn't get Todd Blanche, then he doesn't get his big $1.8 billion slush fund for the January the 6th people. He doesn't get the Epstein files kind of cover up that I think Todd Blanche does for him. I think, this is a really big deal, but it all comes down to Bill Cassidy. And Bill Cassidy is now, on his way out the Senate, but will he have a spine, or will he be spineless? Anyway, that's enough from me. I've gone on way too long, much longer than I was hoping to. This is almost 2 hours now, so apologies for that. Question here: do you think the midterms will go ahead? Will they be fair? They won't be fair. They already aren't going to be fair because of redistricting. There are loads of things that Trump is trying to do in different ways in terms of interfering with the electoral process in different states. You've got different legislatures in different states doing things to benefit Trump if they are Republican run. You only have to look at Mitch McConnell's seat in Kentucky, where he's gone AWOL since June the 14th, and they changed all the rules there so that Andy Beshear couldn't nominate someone else as a Democratic governor. They took the power away from Andy Beshear as the Republican legislature, and now it's gone past the day. Was it August the 3rd or whatever? And he's still disappeared, and now he doesn't need to be replaced. And so you've got someone who's either dead or brain dead that has disappeared for 2 months now, who's no one's doing anything about it. The Republicans are utterly spineless, and they don't believe in any kind of norms or traditions of what is good and proper in the processes of American governance. And they've just given up being a decent law-abiding governing party, and they're just desperate to hang on to power, or desperate to appease Trump and too afraid to stand up to him. And it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. And you're relying on like Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Susan Collins is probably going to lose her seat anyway. Lisa Murkowski and a couple of others who are basically on their way out, or have already distanced themselves significantly enough from Trump, but they're few and far between. And it's just like everyone in the Republican Party kowtows to Trump. So yeah, I think they'll go ahead, but they won't be fair. And Trump was yet again over the last 2 days, multiple times talking about holding on to power after the end of this term. So holding on for a third term, which is unconstitutional. He shouldn't be allowed to do it, but he keeps touting it. So it is super, super worrying. Anyway, that's enough from me. Sorry, I broke down. I didn't break down, not like psychologically. Sorry that the internet failed me a couple of times. I really appreciate you holding on. Thank you to all the mods. Thank you to you guys in live chat. AJ Simo says, I'll bet Trump will scream the midterm elections are fixed. After all, he's done it before. So even though they do win the midterms, the Democrats, he will probably challenge the results and use all the levers at his disposal to do so. So yeah, really good point, AJ. Thank you to Richard Bennett. Thank you to Michael Vuchard. Thank you to Zeb Carter. Thank you to the Pirate, Stephen Bendal, Meg Tild, Oink several times, Malrate, Oink, Malrate, and AJ Simo. Legends, one and all. I really appreciate all your support. Sorry it's been so long. Take care. Big love. It's been good to chat. I better go and see my family. I think they've forgotten who I am. But before I go, cheers, everybody. Here's to what day is it? Is it Friday? I don't know. When my boys aren't at school, I lose track of, I don't have anything that anchors the week anymore, because I just sit in my office 7 days a week doing the same thing. Like this is what I do every single day. And days aren't very different. these days. And so the boy's not at school. I have no idea what day it is. I think it's Friday. If it is Friday, have a good weekend. But I'll still be with you tomorrow and the day after. So, hey ho. Take care. Fiery. I love me a fiery ginger.